Hope Chapel, happy Sunday and good morning. If you are watching this video, that means we got a lot of snow this weekend, and unfortunately, we weren't able to hold in-person services, but we are blessed to be able to connect with you virtually and be able to reach you online this morning. So we're glad you're joining us. If you happen to be joining us for the first time, this is not how our normal services look, but hopefully you'll be encouraged by the message today, and then you'll be able to join us next week when we're in person again for our 9 and 10:30 services. If you happen to be joining us for the first time, whether you're just seeing this through your feed or someone shared it with you, we'd love for you to fill out a Connect card on our website, and you can learn all about our events and things that we have going on here at the church on our website at hopechapelsterling.org. For our regulars, this is going to be a different kind of service. I'm going to do some announcements here at the beginning, and then we'll kind of segue into a pre-recorded message from Pastor Neil that we thought might be impactful and encouraging for you to hear today. So I just want to share some announcements of some things that are coming up and things for you to be aware of on your calendars. One thing that's coming up pretty quick is this Tuesday, January 9th, the YEC registration will be closed. So YEC is a Youth Encountering Christ program, and the conference is actually January 26th through 28th. And so we have a lot of students signing up for that, and so we want to make sure that you get your registration in by the 9th so that you can join us for that weekend that's coming up. Another thing that's coming up next weekend, Sunday, January 14th, is the semi-annual business meeting. This is just kind of a time for us to check in, share some reports from leaders, and really just praise God for what he's done already through this kind of half year. We kind of go from September through January, and then we'll do our annual meeting this summer. But the downloadable guide is available from our past e-letter if you want to download the agenda for that meeting. And we'll also have copies available in the lobby if you want to swing by the church this week or pick one up during the services next weekend. And so that will be down in the Kids Connect wing in the big room from 5 to around 6:30 we'll wrap up. After that, we have a new support group happening here at Hope Chapel. It's called Waiting in Hope, and it's actually to support women who are having difficulty conceiving and dealing with infertility. And it's not just for people at Hope Chapel, but it's also for all women in the community to join in and be supported during a difficult time that they might be going through. And so we wanted to make that available to you and share it, and so you can get the word out to the community to join us for that. It'll be 4 to 5 on Sundays, and that'll start up on January 21st. And so just be mindful that that's happening. Check out the calendar if you need the dates, and there is a sign-up link on our website for that. So we'd love for you to sign up so we have enough copies of the 30-day devotional that goes along with that. After that, we have a starter life group happening. So if you're newer to Hope Chapel, or if you kind of missed the sign-up time for life groups, or maybe the fall just wasn't the right season for a life group, but now you're kind of ready to join one, Pastor Steve is actually hosting a starter life group, and that's going to start on February 1st, which is a Thursday. And that will go for 11 weeks every Thursday from 6:30 to 7:30. And so if you're just kind of looking at starting into a new life group, or you're looking for more ways to get connected, that is a great group to join, and it meets right here at the building. And so if you'd like to join that, you can also sign up for that online at hopechapelsterling.org, so we know who's going to be showing up for that, and we'd love to see you there. The last thing that I wanted to share today is we are actually having a small team that are getting ready to leave for the Dominican Republic this Friday, the 12th. And I'm a part of that team, and also my parents, Chris and Heather Federley, and then John Vermelia is going to join us, and Wendy Charbonneau as well. And so if you could just be praying for us this week, we're going through all the preparation for that. We're going to be serving with Ina York, who works with the Cercadillo Project in the Dominican, and we're really excited for the trip. It's a part of our Discipleship 2 program that we started this past fall. And so just be praying for our team as we go. Normally we'd commission us out, but we are just relying on your prayers this week to commission us as we leave on Friday. And so just keep us in your prayers, keep us in your thoughts, and we will definitely update you as we can. So that is it for announcements today. Again, thank you for joining us online. I wish I could be seeing all your faces today, but I will definitely be seeing you guys this week, and we'll see you next Sunday as well. So we're going to segue now into the sermon that was pre-recorded for you guys. So I hope this is encouraging. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope you stay warm and safe in some of this winter weather.
message from Daniel chapter 2. Yes, we are finally out of Daniel 1 after 3 full weeks there. And we've been looking at the book of Daniel through this theme of an unshakable life. What can we learn from Daniel about living a life that is never shaken? And today I want to kind of get you in the mood by giving you a challenge, okay? So I'm going to bring up this crossword puzzle on the wall, all right? So here is what you need to do. By tomorrow morning, right, 24 hours from now, by tomorrow morning, without any clues, you have to get every single answer right. Without any clues, you have to get every single answer right. And if you don't, you pay with your life. And if you do, I'm going to make you really rich. I'll make you the 5th richest person in the world. But if you don't get every single answer right by tomorrow at 9:29, then you're gone. How many of you are up for the challenge? Well, Daniel and his friends didn't have any choice when they were presented with that kind of a challenge. And that's why this morning's message is called Mission Impossible. And there are sometimes you and I encounter moments in our lives when we think that the task that is before us, the challenge that we have, is impossible. Whether there's just so much to be done and you're never going to get it done. Or sometimes you hear news, health news, the C word creeps into the conversation, and you're thinking, I'm never going to be able to get through this. Sometimes it's the loss of a loved one. And you think, I'm never going to be able to get through this. There are many moments in our journey when we feel like we're up against this task that is beyond our capabilities and we're facing a mission impossible. Now, I hope none of us have ever faced life and death the way Daniel and his friends did, and it wasn't limited just to them, but there are some great things that you and I can learn from Daniel and his friends about how to handle those moments in our lives where we feel totally overwhelmed by what we have to deal with or what we have to do or the needs that we need to meet. And we can look at their lives and see some things that really teach us about how to handle those moments. So what I want to do is I want to read through a good portion of Daniel chapter 2. I'll make a few comments about this as we go through it. And then when we get to the far end, I'll actually come back and draw out some points for us about how to handle those moments in our lives when we think we've been confronted with an impossible mission. So I'm going to be reading from Daniel chapter 2 today. And I'm going to be reading verses 1 through 30. Yes, that's a lot. And then I'm going to skip some verses. And I'm going to pick up again in verse 46. And next week, we'll come back to the vision, which that will become clearer in just a moment. Next week, we'll come back and we'll talk about the meaning of the vision and some of the truths that can come to us from it out of the book of Daniel. So follow along with me as I read. Keep the backdrop. Daniel, at 15 years of age, he's now probably about ready to graduate from their re-education school. So he's like 18, 19 years of age, maybe 20. So he's still a very young man. And this is what happens. In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and sleep deserted him. We're going to see this happen again and again with the king as he goes forward. He's suffering from insomnia, if you will. He's having these horrible dreams, and some of it is clearly related to the fact that he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, because he is literally the single ruler over all of the known world at that point in time. So if there was a problem in the world, it was his problem. And he needed to solve it. And he wasn't sleeping well. So the king had this dream. So the king gave orders to summon the magicians, the mediums, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. We see the Chaldeans in Jesus' story because they are the magi, the wise men. The Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. So these 4, the magicians and the mediums and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, these basically would have been the faculty of the leading universities in Babylon. This was the intellectual elite from their region. So that this, like, you imagine like President of the United States is up against a problem that he's never experienced before. He reaches out to all of his cabinet ministers and says, you get your experts advisors in here right now, and they're going to solve this for me. That's exactly what's going on. When they came and stood before the king, he said to them, I had a dream, and I'm anxious to understand it. Which being interpreted means I want to get some sleep, and I can't sleep until I know what this is all about. So the Chaldeans spoke to the king, and you'll notice some of your translations say the Aramaic starts here. A lot of the book of Daniel is written in Hebrew, but there are portions where it's written in a much more widely known language of the region, which is Aramaic. It says, may the king live forever. You tell the servants your dream, and we'll give you the interpretation. And the king replied to the Chaldeans, my word is final. In other words, no debate, right? Listen up, because I'm not going to say this twice. Pay attention. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn from limb, and your houses will be made a garbage dump. Right? And the kings in those days were known for extravagance. We're going to see that with the fiery furnace and the lion's den coming up, right? When they did something, they wanted to go big. So if they blessed you, they wanted to go big, and if they destroyed you, they wanted to go big, right? So he says, so here's it. No debate. Not only do you have to give me the interpretation, you're also going to tell me the dream. Verse 6, but if you make known the dream and its interpretation known to me, you'll receive gifts, a reward, and great honor from me. So make the dream and its interpretation known to me. There's a crossword puzzle. Get all the answers right, you can live. You get any of the answers wrong, it's not going to be good. It's exactly the dilemma they're in. They answered a second time. May the king tell a dream to his servants. They're saying, well, clearly we didn't hear him right. He doesn't really expect us to tell him the dream as well as this, and we didn't hear him right. So may the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will make known the interpretation. And the king replies, says, listen, I'm not dumb. I'm putting my language on it. He says, I know for certain you're trying to gain some time because you see that my word is final. He says, listen, I'm no dummy. I know your tricks, right? So we really don't know why the king demanded that they tell him the dream and its interpretation. There's really one of two reasons. One is he didn't remember it, but it bothered him, and he wanted to know what it was. Or two, he finally figured out that, you know what, you give anybody a plot, they can write a creative story. So he says, if I tell them that they can go back, and these guys are bright, they just go back and write some fictional interpretation, and it doesn't really, So he says, you know what, the only way I can figure out if they really know what they're talking about, that their interpretation holds any weight, is that they have to tell me what the dream is as well as what it means. It says, again, verse 9, if you don't tell me the dream, there's one decree for you. You have conspired to tell me something false or fraudulent until the situation changes. So tell me the dream, and I will know you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king. So they seem to be the spokesman, right? The magi. No one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, medium, or Chaldean. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Being interpreted, what they're saying is, what you're asking for is impossible. Like some of the moments that we experience in our lives. For whatever reasons, those moments where we're just overwhelmed, under-resourced, overly tired, or whatever it is, we face those moments where you're so over, and we feel like there's just no way I can get through this. It's impossible. Verse 12, because of this, the king became violently angry and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon, which includes Daniel and Meshach and Shadrach and Abednego, right? or you can go by Meshach, Azariah, and Hananiah. They're sucked up in the king's anger. The decree was issued that the wise men were to be executed, and they searched for Daniel and his friends to execute them. So the king speaks, the guard fans out. Get over to the dormitory, wrap up all the students, get out here and get all these guys ready, and they're rounding everybody up to be executed. Then Daniel responded with tact and discretion to Arioch. We're going to talk about it. Isn't that amazing? 20 years of age. He responded with tact and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the king's officer, why is the decree from the king so harsh? I mean, what's happened? Why are we all supposed to be slaughtered, right? Then Arioch explained the situation to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so they could give the king the interpretation. Now, we don't really know how it is that Daniel had access to the king, except for the fact that God granted him favor. I mean, his life is on the line, and somehow or another, he's able to get before the king, or at least before somebody who has the ear of the king, and said, listen, can you just put the brakes on it for one night, and let me get back to you. Still pretty heady for a 20-year-old. Then Daniel went to his house, and he told his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, urging them to ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning his mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. And the mystery was then revealed to Daniel in a vision at night. And Daniel praised the God of the heavens and declared, may the name of God be praised forever and ever. For wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what's in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power. And now you have let me know what we have asked for you has let us know the king's mystery. So then Daniel went and found Arioch, whom the king had assigned to destroy the wise men of Babylon. So he goes to his executor, and he says, look at the next verse. It says, he came and said, don't destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I'll give him the interpretation. So then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said, I have found a man among the Judean exiles who can let the king know the interpretation, which being read says he's looking for the credit. Right? He said, hey, you know what? I've been trying to solve your problem when I finally found a guy who can. So so he's trying to be elevated in the eyes of the king, right? Great contrast to what you're going to see from Daniel in just a minute. So the king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me the dream I had in its interpretation? And Daniel answered the king, no wise man, no medium, no magician, no diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. And I'm sure at this point the king's saying, well, why are you standing before me? Why isn't your head on the block? Right? But Daniel doesn't stop there. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days. Your dream and the visions that came into your mind as you lay in your bed were these, your majesty. All right? While you were in your bed, thoughts came to your mind about what will happen, and the revealer of mysteries has let you know what will happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. And then we're going to skip the vision. So if you really want to get that, you got to come back next week, right? Little tease, right? Don't they do it at the end of little sitcoms that try to get you to come to the next one? Right? Verse 46, Daniel tells him the dream and the interpretation. So then King Nebuchadnezzar fell face down, worshipped Daniel, and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, your God, Listen to this. This is coming out of the mouth of the king Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylons, whose God they considered to be the greatest was Marduk. And listen to what's coming out of his mouth. Your God is indeed God of gods. Wow. Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many generous gifts. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief governor over all the wise men of Babylon. So I think the second one maybe wasn't such a great job, but the first one was probably pretty good, right? At Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. Wow. Imagine what it must have been like for Daniel. 20 years of age, the commander of the king's guard, of the greatest king on the planet, knocks on your door and says, line up, we got to take you guys off to this firing squad. And by the time the event is over, Daniel is second in command of the entire kingdom. What do we have to do to deal with Mission Impossible? And I just want to point out a few things to you, I think that are really helpful for us when we get into those moments where we feel overwhelmed. When it feels like our life is getting shaken because that which we have to deal with seems to be beyond our capabilities or our resources or our energy. And I think those moments come in our lives, and we see people crack underneath that on a lot of occasions. And so there are just a few points that I want to make out of this text. And they may have applications to you in other areas, but I think these are powerful for us when we get into those moments and we just feel like, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And here's the very first point. This may seem very simple, but I got to tell you, this is, if you don't get anything else, this is the point to get this morning. Don't panic. Don't panic. You know God's in charge. Let me say that last one. Don't panic. You know God is in charge. Don't panic. Right? Don't panic. We sometimes we get into these modes and we feel like our lives are falling apart and we're just free falling. We're not. We're in the hands of God. He's always in charge. And so you just see this unpack like this a little bit. Look at Daniel, and we see this coming out of Daniel, and I mentioned this earlier when we were reading through it in verse 14. When the commander of the king's guard, of the greatest guy on the planet, who has absolute authority over life and death for everybody who's in his kingdom, when that guy knocks on his door and says, line up, it's time to go to die, Daniel acts with tact and discretion. He doesn't panic. He doesn't freak out. He doesn't go try to fix his bag, escape out the back door, climb over the wall, try to run across the desert back to Jerusalem. He doesn't do any of that stuff. He responds with tact, and he doesn't panic. And the reason he doesn't panic is because he knows that the God is in charge. You know, you can look at verse 237. You know, when he's speaking to the king, says, Your Majesty, you are the kings of kings, and the God of heaven has given you sovereignty. Daniel had no doubt that the only reason why Nebuchadnezzar was in charge of all of the known nations at that point in time is because God had put him there, even though he wasn't a follower of God. Daniel knew that God was sovereign. So in Daniel's understanding, the only reason why he's been ripped out of his home and his home city destroyed, and the temple of his God defiled, the only reason why that has happened is because God wanted it to happen. So the only reason that he's in Babylon with his life hanging in the balance is because somehow or another it fit into God's plan. And listen, one of the things that you and I need to remind ourselves when we get into those most difficult moments is to say there's nothing that's going to happen in your life that's outside of the sovereignty of God. And this is one of those big moments for us, right? Because look at this passage of Scripture from Proverbs chapter 19, verse 21. We set out our plans, right? We set out our plans in our heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. Can I interpret this for you? Right? What this means is, say, we figure out these are our expectations, and then when our expectations aren't met because God's plans prevail, somehow or another we land up panicking. And our expectation should be God's governing my life each and every single day. Now, I am not an advocate of fatalism, say, hey, it doesn't matter what I do. Whether I go to college or study or get my, none of that, do I save for my future? None of that matters because it's all in God's hands. I think everything in the book of Daniel would argue against the sense of fatalism to say, I'm just going to try to be as stupid as I can and see what God does. That's not the mode of all of Daniel. Daniel is trying to do whatever he can to be faithful and to excel throughout the whole journey. But at the end of the day, he understands that everything that's going on in his life is a result of God's sovereignty. Now, we may not like that path, but we shouldn't panic as we're walking that path. He acted with discretion. And you know, even by the time we get to the end you look, we not only read the statement here from Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2, but again, he's going to say the same thing in chapter 4. I mean, over and over again, you're going to see this acknowledgement that God is sovereign. He's on the ultimate throne. He's over everything. And with that, it just seeps down through. And, you know, I said this to the men at our gathering on Thursday night. I mean, this is part of it. I mean, we are going through some difficult moments in our homes, in our communities, in our workplaces, in our nation, around the globe. It's been a tough 15 months. None of this is outside of God's sovereignty. None of it is outside of God's sovereignty. Any experience that you're going through, it is a part of God's journey for you. And somehow or another, it works into God's good plan. That can be difficult to fathom intellectually, but from a faith standpoint, is the foundation of not panicking, but acting with tact and discretion. Here's the second thing I want to give you. So, so transition from point 1 to point 2 with this phrase. When you're in those moments, think, don't freak. All right? Don't freak out, but think. Think. Think about God. Think about His sovereignty. Think. Don't freak. And as a part of that, you land up in a place where you act instead of just reacting. Right? You act instead of just reacting. Look at Daniel in chapter 2, verse 16. Right after he hears this message, right? The very first thing he does is he acts. And somehow he gets access to the king and he says, would you give me just a little bit of time? I'm not stalling like the Magi and the other guys saying, hey, you know, if you tell us the dream and I'm not trying to weigh her down. Just give me one night to figure this out and I'll be back. And then, you know, you can execute me tomorrow as well as you can execute me today. Just give me one night to work on this, right? He acts instead of just reacts. And so he's being discerning and he's working towards a solution. And one of the things I'd say to you is you know, having been through some of these moments myself, having these kinds of moments certainly in our future and et cetera, when you think about when you get into these moments, it's so easy to let our emotions take over. And I'm not saying that those aren't relevant, but we also need to make sure that we're acting through this, not just reacting. And what you see Daniel doing is he starts to work through all of this, as he begins to out of his realization that he knows that God can give the answer, he starts to put together a plan. He begins to work at it, and he works through all that stuff. And in many ways, I look at the story of Joseph, another rag from riches kind of experience at the end of the book of Genesis. You know, when he's in that moment and he has to interpret the dream for the Pharaoh, he not only tells the Pharaoh what the dream means, and he says, you know what, this is really what you should do. He gives him an action plan. He's not just reacting, he's acting, he's trusting in, and he's providing that guidance. And there's a place where you and I just need not to yield to our emotions, but we need to act in faith rather than just reacting to our circumstances, and to be discerning and working towards a solution. And as we saw in Daniel chapter 2, verse 16, Daniel went at once to see the king and requested more time. You know, I see a contrast. Some of you are familiar with the book of Job. I know it looks like Job, and it's not a book in the Bible about Steve Jobs. I want you to know that. It's a book called Job, right? And we see at the beginning, his life just falls apart. I mean, he loses his family, his wealth, his economy. He loses his home. He loses his health. He loses everything. The only thing he has left is his wife. And she reacts to the situation. She says, you know what, just curse God and die. Just get it over with. Put yourself out of your misery. Instead, he acts. He said, man, are we gonna accept good from the Lord and not accept evil? And so he acts. He trusts in that, and he moves forward, and he begins to seek an answer. I flipped too many pages. As a part of this, we need to think. And what you see Daniel doing here in the text is he's trying to, when Arioch shows up and he says, all right, line up, you guys got to go, we got to execute you guys, sorry, bad day, sorry, we know what, I got to get home, I got a dinner date, so hurry it up. You know, and Daniel's like, well, what happened? Right? What happened? You know, so he's not just, so he's acting instead of just reacting. And then when he's in the midst of it, he's trying to think through everything. Let me use this word. He's trying to research the problem so he can find a solution. And that's one of the things that you and I need to do. God gave us the 6 inches between our ears for a reason. Now, I'm not saying our hearts aren't powerful. That might be some of the places that are bringing the greatest joy moments in our lives. But it's the instrument that God put between our ears that is the most powerful tool that we have. And he said, do some research, right? He wants to understand what's going on. So I would tell you to think, seek to understand what's happening and why. Just a little tidbit. Some of you in this room have been through a journey with like cancer, either for yourself or with a loved one. Almost inevitably, what will you do? You'll get a second opinion. And so I'd encourage you, when you're in these moments, look around and talk to the people who can pour information into you because they know. Some of that information comes from people who've been there before. You know, if you're facing the loss of a spouse, there are people who've been through that journey before you. They can pour into your life. Some have been through critical problems with their children, whether they're young children or adult children. There are people who can pour into you through those experiences. And you can go right on down the line. You know, and just, so there's just research the problem. Don't just panic and give into your emotions and get carried along with your reactions to all the stimuli, but put your trust in God, because he's always sovereign. Act, and then begin to think and figure out, how is it that God and I and the tools that he's given me and the gifts that are available, how can all of that go forward? Think. Seek to understand what's happening and why. And I know why you were dragging now, because I missed the point and went back to it. There you go. Thanks you, Jen. All right. So if you really want to have an impossible task, be the person who's running my outline back in the sound booth while I'm preaching, because it's impossible to follow me. All right? Here's the next point. Pray. Not only more specifically, pray and ask other people to pray with you. Right? Pray and ask other people to pray with you. Again, look at our text, right? We see Daniel in chapter 2, verse 17 and 18. Right after he gets back from the king, where does he go? He goes to his 3 friends. He says, guys, man, we got to pray. We got to pray. This is it. We got a crossword puzzle with no clues. And we got to fill it in completely correct by tomorrow morning. Man, we need to pray. We need to pray. And so the 4 of them, they pray. So, and when you are in the midst of a moment where life seems overwhelming, pray. and invite other people to pray with you. It's interesting. God actually invites us to do just that. Look at Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 3 says this, call to me and I will answer you. That sounds pretty certain to me. Call to me and I will answer you. I will tell you marvelous and wonderful things you could never figure out on your own. What a prayer promise for Daniel and his friends in that moment. Jeremiah lives in the same time period as them, going through the same experiences, just in a different location that they are. Right? And God says, call to me and I'm going to answer you. You're doing your research, and the ultimate place to look for the information that you need is from God himself through prayer. And God says, you call to me, I'm going to answer you, and I'm going to tell you things that you could never figure out on your own. You know what the Bible calls those? A mystery. Mysteries are truth that you and I can never figure out on our own, that God has to reveal to us. So this is why we pray. You know, God knows we need stuff, and we pray. And listen, this is just an incredible moment for us. This is just a reminder about why you need to be a part of spiritual community. If you don't have people in your life that you can invite to pray with you and for you, without having to answer 1,000 questions about everything that's gone on and is going on, if you're not in that position, then you're not in a position like Daniel. You need to have people in your life who know who you are, that are walking this journey with you, that you can call upon to pray with you and for you. It's great stuff. And so that, again, just this is why you need a church home. This is why you need a spiritual community. We call those life groups. You just need those kinds of people in the midst of all of that. Another thing you see about handling Mission Impossible. When we're not panicking and we're trying to think and figure out the answers and then trying to act instead of just reacting. And so now we're praying when God gives the answer, when God gives guidance, when God grants wisdom. It's a chance for us to worship. It's a chance for us to worship. You know, and listen, this is a problem area for a lot of us. Because once we get the answer, we want to go run with it, right? We want to run with it. Before Daniel gets up and runs to the king, he takes some moments to worship God, right? Look at verses 20 and following. So, you know, we need to worship God because God always earns it. And so as he begins God gives him the answer that he's looking for. He says, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He is worshiping God for who he is. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings, another expression of sovereignty. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep things. He's praising him for the things that God does. Right? Those are the things that we, you know, and then he offers gratitude. I offer thanks and praise to you. And as we looked at this summer back in our Healthy Habits, our Holy Habits series, you know, worship is simply acknowledging the value of God and then adjusting our lives to that value. And the reason why a lot of us, our worship falls flat is because we acknowledge the value of God, but we never adjust our lives to that value that we've just acknowledged. Daniel does. Daniel does. Two more quick points, because I know it's Mother's Day and you probably got brunch appointment somewhere or some kind of an egg something or other in the oven. So he worships God. Two more things, just real quick. Keep this in mind, right? He serves others. He's passing the blessing on. Right? God gives him the answer, and he doesn't just hold it to himself. What's the very first thing that he does? He runs to Arioch, and he says, stop. Don't execute those guys. So, you know, and these guys that he's saving their lives, by chapter 6, they're trying to set him up to be killed. These are his enemies in waiting, and Daniel is saving them, saying, you know, he and his 4 friends, I mean, the king's giving them time. But they're starting to line up all the other guys, and he said, no, stop, hold it. Take me to the king. I got the answers. Don't execute anybody. And he intervenes for them. You see the same Spirit later. He gets elevated to be ruler over all of the kingdom. And he says, you know what? I can't do this alone. And I need people I can trust. Can you bring along Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego? Can you bring them along as well? And they become rulers with him underneath. He's serving those who are around him. Listen, our light as the light of the world is probably never on display as greatly as it is in those moments when we are facing Mission Impossible. It's like the hill that we're on gets raised up and the trees that are blocking it get cut down and our lives are up and the testimony of our lives, the opportunity to be a witness to others just grows more powerful in those moments. And when you're in those times where God's leading you through that moment of Mission Impossible, have your eyes up looking around and say, who can I bless in this journey? Who can I serve in this journey? Last one, point other people to God. Arioch goes into the king. He said, hey, I found your answer. I got this guy. You know, he's trying to get credit. In comes Daniel, and Daniel says, you know what? I wish I could take credit for this, but I can't. Because there's no wise man. There's no sorcerer. There's no medium. There's no Chaldean. And I fit into one of those categories. There's no human on the planet who could do what you've asked to be done. It's only the God in heaven who's done so. And you'll see his testimony that comes out of Nebuchadnezzar at the end of chapter 2. It's reiterated as we go along. Some interpreters actually believe that he became a believer in Yahweh as a result of Daniel's ministry to him. Incredible stuff. But man, all the way along, the greatest privilege that you and I have is to point people to God. Is to point people to God. And listen, those moments that are mission impossible in our lives are moments that God gives us to point people to him. So I just have a closing thought for you, just like an action item to work on. You know, given your belief, and if you don't believe this to be true, I invite you to believe this by placing your faith in Jesus Christ. Given your belief that God is sovereign, how does that conviction need to change something that you're handling right now in your life? The way that you're handling something right now in your life. All of us have stuff that's going on. And some of it, we think we're like in a... How is it that your confidence that somehow or another this is all a part of God's plan for you? How does that need to impact the way that you're acting and reacting in the impossible moment that you're in? Let's pray together for just a second. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for Daniel and his faithfulness and just the demonstration that you've provided through their lives of what you want to do in our lives. God, help us not to panic. Help us to trust in the God who's sovereign through our faith in Jesus Christ. And it's his name that we pray in. Amen. Amen.